what we're going to do today is give you an insight into the project, the Consolation and Hope in a Time of Crisis. Now, we're very much at the beginning of this research, given that we only started in June last year. So what we will be sharing with you today is very much an initial analysis. There's a lot more to come. The research aim is to find out how chaplains from Church of England and Catholic school sector can nurture a sense of spiritual resilience in Year 7 during their induction year and mitigate the sense of loss they may have suffered due to COVID-19 disruption. Our main research questions you can see on the screen now are looking at how experienced chaplains nurture spiritual resilience of Year 7 students. How do chaplains identify and evaluate best practice in developing spiritual resilience in both their own and each other's practice? And then the third one, to what extent does a virtual community of practice support school chaplains? Because we're at early stage now, this is really focused on the first research question. The project is a qualitative investigation bringing chaplains together in a virtual community of practice. A virtual community of practice was not through choice, but through COVID restrictions. We had to have things online, but actually it has a huge advantage. It enables chaplains from across the country and across denominations to come together in a safe space. Our rationale for this is to encourage a shared collaboration of expertise and knowledge, where chaplains can learn from each other, listen to each other, and support each other. We've got a schedule of total of 9 of these VCOPs, as we've called them, throughout the project. Accompanying each of the 9 VCOPs, the research team has provided research digests that offer a framework for the discussion, but they're also available once we've used them in the VCOP with community of practice, available online. The link will appear in the chat soon. Transcripts of each VCOP are then analysed. Now, we're analysing them thematically using an adaptation of Carol Gilligan's I-Poem method. The findings will then be regularly disseminated through briefing papers and these webinars. This is the first of 5 of the webinars we're doing over the course of the project. The analysis involves a detailed reading and rereading of the transcripts. The first reading looks at what themes are emerging across the group. What are people saying? Well, what's emerging out of this? The second reading, which is the one we've been focused on recently, focuses on how participants speak about themselves, the voices they speak in, and this is the basis of an I-Poem. Basically, the I-Poem method pulls together all the sentences in which a participant uses I. Now, this offers a fascinating insight into the voice of the participants. We can look at this in each VCOP between individuals, but across the time as well. How are things different from the way they were in June 2021 to they were in December 2021? The next stage is to do reading 3 and 4. Reading 3 looks at the relationships with others. When are people using we? How are they relating to others? And reading 4 is quite interesting, looks at the institutional context, in the school, but also the church. How are the chaplains relating and speaking of relations with the school as the institution and the church? Now, we focused on Year 7, and lots of people have asked us, why just Year 7? These issues are across the board. They're particularly about the transition from Year 11 to 6th form and from 6th form to university. We had several reasons for focusing just on Year 7. One, we had to put some boundaries on this research, but also, as the recent Bernardes report points out, in a post-lockdown context, some young people, especially those transitioning between schools, are finding adapting to new routines after so much disruption even more challenging than usual. We also recognise that although transitions are part of life, one of the most critical transition and induction stages in life happens in this Year 6, Year 7 shift. Children are often moving from small primary school environments where they usually just have one class teacher and one classroom for all their lessons to a much larger secondary environment with different teachers for different subjects, and where they're required to move from class to class throughout the day. Hence, if future transitions are to be embraced positively, key transition stages such as this one need to be experienced as smoothly as possible. As Anna Freud in some of her research states, if a child struggles with transition, it can have a negative impact on their well-being and on their academic achievement. So the second focus is spiritual resilience. Again, we need to explain this a little bit before we go further. Our working understanding of spiritual resilience for this project is underpinned by the thinking of Marston, who states that an individual's resilience is embedded in relationships and social system. It's not an individual thing totally, it is relational. Connecting with an individual's innate spirituality is a key to nurturing a resilient outlook. Although spirituality need not be expressed through religious belief, for some young people, we must recognise their spiritual call is expressed through faith in God. Therefore, providing opportunities for students in school to engage with the worshipping community and encounter the power of the gospel is crucial for fostering spiritual resilience and enabling young people to spiritually flourish. NICE has developed an understanding of spiritual flourishing. It's linked to the Hebrew concept of shalom and denotes a right relationship with God, with others, with God's good creation, with self. And it picks up on the John 10. It's about living life to the full. In the context of this project, spiritual resilience refers to helping students maintain their sense of self and purpose while encountering adversity through positive relationships with other nurturing and competent adults rooted in spirituality, faith and hope. Even though we are focusing here on the role of chaplaincy in this research, it's important at this stage and throughout to point out that nurturing a sense of resilience, of spiritual resilience, cannot be confined to any individual or team. It's a whole school responsibility that permeates the life of the community. Now, I'm going to draw to a close there and hand over to Anne Pittaway, who's going to talk you through some of the findings that we've had to date.
Lovely, thank you.
Sorry, Anne.
No problem. So several things have stood out for us from our initial analysis of the first VCOP meetings. We've gained an insight not only into the experiences and encounters of Year 7 induction students, but also the challenges that the chaplains themselves have faced. What I share with you on the following slides is based on the period June 2021 to December 2021. Chaplains spoke of a Year 7 cohort who showed a sense of immaturity, with many of them just not secondary ready. They had experienced as Year 6 pupils fragmented and broken transition procedures without traditional end-of-term celebrations, and in many cases, no real closure of their primary education. One chaplain said it was as if they were waiting to start secondary school and that transition induction process had been put on hold. Another said, they're still a bit like primary school kids. Furthermore, on entering their secondary environment, the bubble systems employed in most of the schools to prevent the spread of infection also prevented the students from encountering the fullness of secondary school culture. Having this system left many of the students quite dependent and needy on others. As one of the chaplains stated, I think because the environment has been so tightly controlled, there's not that element of you've got to go out there and find your feet. And yes, you're on your own, but it will get better. But you've got to go out there and find your way around and make new friends. All the chaplains agreed that mental health issues across their schools and within the Year 7 cohorts had escalated. Issues that once tended to emerge amongst the older students were now being brought to their attention amongst Year 7s. A chaplain said, what we've noticed in bucket loads is the mental health needs of the Year 7s has been on a very different scale from previous years. And we've noticed some really very complex needs around eating disorders, OCD, and struggling to attend school at all. It's just hit us like a juggernaut, really. Anxiety was witnessed in different ways. One chaplain noted Year 7 students in his classes had talked quite a lot about adults not agreeing. They see politicians arguing. They're seeing people in power and authority behaving quite badly. And that's kind of pulled the foundations from underneath them. Muddled anxiety was also mentioned. This referred to students coming in with issues that were not necessarily COVID related, but the students were thinking COVID was to blame for everything that was going wrong in their lives. It was being used as a blanket blame for all issues. Furthermore, parents of Year 7 were contacting schools saying their children were anxious. But further investigation revealed it was actually the parents that were anxious and they were projecting it onto their children. And so thus there was an increased sense of displaced anxiety in this situation. Chaplains were also conscious of the fact that there was a lack of communal worship because of imposed COVID restrictions, but also because they had little time to focus on worship. One chaplain spoke of having their first in-person collective worship for Year 7 in July 2021. It was the first time they had physically been together as a year group since starting the school the previous September 2020. The chaplain opening that service said to his Year 7, "Have a good look around you because this is our Year 7. They hadn't even seen each other, let alone met the rest of the school." Another chaplain said the first physical collective worship for their Year 7 was to happen later that month in July. Her worry was that some haven't been to church, they don't know what church is, and they don't know how to behave with each other in church. And she simply didn't have the time to prepare them for this. Regarding other Year 7s that did come from worship in homes, she said their sense of time means that church is something they did in the past, and so wasn't relevant so much to their days now. Whether students enter their new school community with excitement or trepidation or both, having a sense of belonging provides a crucial anchor and foundation for personal growth, resilience, and spiritual flourishing. It is therefore important that students feel connected, that they feel protected and respected in their new surroundings, because this helps them feel safe and valued. And when they feel like that, they're more likely to actually explore their new surroundings. There was a real urgency among the chaplains to re-establish this sense of community with that network of support surrounding the students. Because, as I said before, they're more likely then to not only explore their new environment, but they're also more likely to share their concerns and their anxieties that they come in with others within the school. They feel more trusting of others. The chaplains have stressed that being surrounded by positive role models is essential in helping students flourish and gain a sense of purpose and meaning within their own lives. One said that during the last academic year, the older students were less caring about the Year 7s simply because they hadn't been introduced to them. They didn't know who they were. Following the return of the whole school community, chaplains found that both students and staff were keen to engage in times of reflection and prayer. They have found more than ever staff and students are making use of the chaplaincy or chapel space for quiet reflection. A chaplain said, "Something has really surprised me with our Year 7 students, and that's how they've dealt with loss. They come into the chapel, they're lighting a candle on our remembrance tree, and they're saying prayers. And it's positive, for want of a better term. They're not coming to the chapel in floods of tears, and I don't know what to do. It's like, my nan passed away last Wednesday, and I'd like to say a prayer." And sometimes they say prayers on their own, and then they'll talk about happy memories, and they'll walk out of the chapel and say, "Thank you, sir." It's quite strange, but it's quite a positive experience. It has been noted by the chaplains that conversations around death have become less of a taboo amongst staff and students at this time. As part of the induction process and getting to know the school community, one school has been able to help Year 7 feel connected with the wider community linked to their school via virtual introductions. In this school, the Convent of Sisters and the church community have been able to speak about their connection and experience of the school community using the medium of Microsoft Teams. This is something they will continue to do with future induction procedures. This chaplain said, circumstances have forced us to think differently and probably better, and this is something we will keep in the future. Turning our attention to the experience of the chaplains themselves, the chaplains said they spent the first year post-lockdown firefighting without usual protocols or procedures to fall back on. Chaplains spoke of their change in role. They had become more like a triage service, meaning that making connections with new students and building relationships was not happening through pastoral support as it had done in previous years, because most of their cases were being referred to specialists. A chaplain said, staff will send me a student that they are desperately worried about. I'll have a conversation with them, and within a couple of minutes, I know full well that I'm going to be referring them to specialist counselling. The chaplains all agreed they were dealing far more with increased levels of anxiety in staff than in previous years. So not only have the chaplains been inundated with anxieties from students, the same can be said of staff coming to them with such issues. This situation has left the chaplains often struggling to attend to and sustain their own well-being and spiritual resilience. These are some of the comments from the chaplains. I'm having to get stricter with standing back and saying no, as everything is so overwhelming and I need to protect my own well-being. I'm exhausted now, and actually it's getting me down. It's that spiritual nurturing, recharging of the spiritual batteries. That's what's getting squeezed out, because that's time when I could be doing something else. So yeah, I perhaps think we're all the same. We've kind of put our own needs to one side, and maybe that's come back to bite us. Despite the very real sense of mental and physical exhaustion, chaplains are still focused on a sense of hope going forward. Online worship has offered a positive engagement for many students, and so there is the intention to continue with this in the future. The chaplains are once again welcoming pupils back into chaplaincy spaces, and in fact there is a sense that not only students but staff are engaging more in times of reflection and prayer. A chaplain said there is a notable appreciation from non-practicing Christian members of staff who have said, this is really good, this is meaning something. Chaplains are also having times of being able to restart communal worship, and they're starting to bring pupils back into church where it's appropriate. There is a strong focus on building back a sense of community where resilience can be nurtured and life can flourish. The chaplains reported that nurturing spiritual resilience was critical, and emphasises the necessary focus on the role of faith as an underpinning foundation for building this resilience. In summing this up, one chaplain said, in terms of spiritual resilience, we're trying to sort of make a distinction between spiritual resilience and any other kind of resilience. I think that's referring even more to that inner sense of who am I and what's my worth. Just on to the next slide, please, Anne. As with any research, the initial findings raise more questions than answers. At this early stage, it is clear from this evidence that chaplains provide an insight into the experience of schools that crosses well-being and spiritual dimensions. They also see the educational challenges of the present crisis, as well as the challenges to the individual and community spirit of the school. Their perspective crosses multiple boundaries within the school and within an understanding of what happens in and around the school. The initial phase of our investigation considered the experiences and reflections of chaplains and Year 7 induction students during the academic year of 2020 to 2021. Moving forward, we will be focusing particularly on the impact of COVID-19 on vulnerable and disadvantaged Year 7 induction students. We'll also be creating with the chaplains a CPD toolkit on spiritual resilience to be disseminated to a wider audience, including schools without chaplaincy support. And we will be evaluating to what extent a virtual community of practice supports school chaplains in their work in a time of crisis, such as the COVID-19 pandemic. So thank you very much for listening to our presentation this afternoon.